So, Vivek Ramaswamy has dropped out of the Republican primaries after getting stomped in Iowa. He's your pretty typical Republican outsider type. He's a business exec running on the platform of being anti woke and hard right in all the ways that you would expect. You've seen one grift, you've seen them all. So nobody expected him to get very far. Let's be honest. His campaign has already had its fair share of controversies, and he's been playing up the antics while not actually putting any money into funding his candidacy. So as I was doing my daily doom scroll, I came across a tweet about Vivek Ramaswamy that made me laugh out loud. I can't verify the validity of its claims, but it did get me thinking, and so here we are. Iowa voter on Ramaswamy. I'm not being prejudiced, guys, which is a phenomenal way to let people know that you're about to say something that's definitely not prejudiced. But I don't like his name. I don't like where he came from. You have to be born in America to run for president, for the record. After 9/11, I still harbor a lot of hard feelings. Let's talk about this. Indian people, for the most part, have the privilege of holding on to our identity as Indian because of the model minority myth. We still face racism and marginalization, but most of that marginalization we face is cultural rather than financial. In a capitalist society, this affords us a unique opportunity to align ourselves with whiteness and access financial success. This is what Ramaswamy's already done, having founded a few companies and made a ton of money. But there's always going to be an upper limit on how close outwardly brown people can actually get to whiteness. And that upper limit is dictated by the flattening of our identities as brown people. Vivek Ramaswamy doesn't have the privilege of appearing white. He's a pretty Indian looking guy with a very Indian sounding name. So his attempts to align himself with whiteness will always result in him just working twice as hard to prove to white people that he's one of the good ones. He will never be white. He will always be flattened to brown, coming with all of the baggage of appearing brown and living with its stereotypes. So what do I mean by flattening? Flattening is the washing away of cultural identity in place of outward appearance. It's something that we all implicitly understand, right? A cop pulling over a black person doesn't initially care or know if that person is rich or poor, or conservative or liberal. Their entire identity is flattened into black. And this happens to other races too. There is white people, which encompasses any and all people who appear white. You could be a white presenting German person or a white presenting British person with an entirely different cultural identity, but it doesn't matter because you're white first. Your culture and identity is secondary to your outward appearance. This flattening is a result of the racial history of America and the necessitation of defining white and color during slavery and Jim Crow. So now let's look at brown people, which is a huge demographic of people, from Arabs to Indians to Muslims and Hindus, so on and so forth. I, as a brown person, can inhabit multiple different marginalized categories at once, depending on how I'm perceived. I could be clocked as Arab Muslim and be randomly selected at the airport, or I can be clocked as Indian with stereotypes of eating weird food, smelling bad, and being sexually repressed and aggressive with women. These are very different groups of people with very different stereotypes attached to them. But because I, as a brown person, look like I could belong to either group, I get to deal with the marginalization of both. Schrodinger's brown guy, if you will. Flattening isn't one size fits all. It depends entirely on who's perceiving me and what their understanding of my culture and identity is. My outward appearance merely informs which stereotypes that person is going to assign to me, but it is up to them to understand what those stereotypes are to begin with. And there's a very good chance that they'll mix both stereotypes if it's convenient for them, because racists don't necessarily hate Muslims or Sikhs or Hindus or any specific group of brown. They'll lash out at anyone who looks like their perceived notion of that identity. And we have examples of this even in recent history. Brown people were the targets of hate crimes post 9/11. Not only Arabs, not only Muslims, but brown people. According to the DOJ and the FBI, the United States Attorney's Office has investigated over 800 incidents since 9/11 involving violence, threats, vandalism, and arson against Arab Americans, Muslims, Sikhs, South Asian Americans, and other individuals perceived to be of Middle Eastern origin. The key word there is perceived and perception. That is the basis of all stereotypes and flattening, is how I'm perceived. And that's also where the grift hits a wall. If you're Vivek Ramaswamy, someone who's saying all the right things to a right-wing base, you're still running into the issue of that base perceiving you as brown. But then there's Nikki Haley. Nikki was born Nimrata Nikki Randhawa to two highly educated Sikh Indian immigrants. I can't speak too confidently on how cultured her upbringing was and how connected she feels to her Indian heritage, but from what she says at her rallies, while identifying with her brownness, she does have some connection and understanding of her parents' heritage. Nikki is an example of someone who successfully manages to dodge being flattened into brown. At first glance, she's white presenting and has dissected her name to sound as white as possible. Granted, she did get Haley from marriage, and you wouldn't know that she's Indian given her appearance and name. And that's partially why she's dodging the same racism that Vivek can't help fall victim to. She's a white woman when she wants to be, and a brown woman when it's convenient for her. And honestly, I can't blame her. The experience of being marginalized is to constantly code switch to maintain safety. People of color are constantly changing how we talk and present ourselves to be afforded access to whatever privileges we can get. But that's the thing. The goal of a truly equitable society is that we shouldn't have to change who we are or how we present to be safe. Vivek Ramaswamy will never be able to actually achieve whiteness, so he has to adopt hard right politics, play up the grift, and prove that he's one of the good ones. Nikki Haley has achieved an outward whiteness that helps her skate by without too much trouble and gives her the privilege of choosing when she wants to be brown. She doesn't need to grift nearly as hard as Ramaswamy does, so she gets to flirt with moderation. And since she's been marginally accepted as white, she would rather uphold a system that's forced her to selectively excise parts of her identity rather than to do the work to advocate for other people not needing to do the same thing. I mean, look at this high school picture of her, and look at what she looks like now. There's a bit of a difference here. But it doesn't matter because they're all going to get stomped by Donald Trump anyway.